Hi, we are here with Rolf Baumeister. He is professor of psychology at the Florida State University. He's one of the 3 to 4 most influential psychologists in this world. He's published numerous papers, 470 papers. I think he's written 30 books. So I'm very glad, Roy, that you're here. Welcome to our program.
Well, thank you, Rolf. My pleasure.
So we talk about men and women today.
All right.
What is better, men or women?
Well, there are two answers. One, it's not plausible that one would be better overall. That, why would nature make men better than women or women better than men? So there are probably real differences, but each time one is better, it's tied to being worse at something else. So I think the differences probably have to even out over the long run. It used to be we always looked for how men were better, now we look for how women are better, but I think there'll be trade-offs. The other answer, though, is that nature seems to take more chances with men. There are more men at both extremes. So if you look at intelligence, for example, the average intelligence of adults is almost the same. Some, if a very large sample, maybe men are just a tiny bit higher, but not worth talking about. But more men at both extremes, a lot more retarded men, a lot more genius men, and the more extreme you get, the bigger the difference between men and women. So I think it's because, so in a sense, men are both better and worse than women. And if you have prejudices, if you can, people sustain their prejudices of which sex is better by looking for confirming evidence. If you want to think men are better, you look at the heroes, the inventors, the philanthropists, the rulers, mostly men. If you want to think women are better, you look at the bottom, the junkies, the criminals, the losers, the homeless, deadbeats, mostly men there too. So both in genetic endowments and in behavior, men seem to go to both extremes.
Mm-hmm. And why is it, what is the, I guess, genetic or evolutionary cause of this fact that men are, they produce more stuff, they are building organizations, but they're also at the bottom, they're the complete losers. Why is that?
Well, that we only have to speculate about. I think this is a plausible idea, but we don't know for sure it's true, that nature takes more chances with males. You can think of a mutation as an experiment to try to create a new human being, but most of those turn out badly. I mean, the human being is already pretty well evolved. So it's possible nature experiments more with males because males have more difference in how much they reproduce. After all, if you make a baby that's not good, it's not good for the species for those bad genes to be passed on generation after generation. Well, many men don't reproduce at all, and that's the same in other species. Many males do not reproduce. Most of the females do reproduce. So once you have a version of a female, it's likely to be passed on from generation to generation.
So let's get back to this point. So you say that most or many men don't reproduce, but right, almost all women do reproduce.
Yes, the research on DNA a few years ago came to the conclusion that today's human population is descended from twice as many women as men. Our ancestors, there were twice as many women as men. Now, an equal number, or almost equal, are born, but that's because most of the males did not reproduce. When I tell this to ordinary people, they're surprised because they think it would be equal, that every baby has one of each.
Sure.
When I tell this to evolutionary biologists and experts, they're surprised it isn't bigger. In many species, 90% of the females reproduce and only 20% of the males.
Horses, for example.
Yes. Many species live like that, and the males fight amongst themselves, and the one that gets to the top, that one has sex with all the females. In human history, too, most cultures have had polygamy, where the few rich men would have several wives. That meant lots of the men had no wives. And so that's the other side of what we were saying before. If nature produces a superior male, then those genes will spread much more rapidly if it's through the male than with the female, because some men have lots and lots of babies, whereas, for a woman to have 10 or 12 babies, that's already a lot, and to have 20 or more is almost impossible. But many men have had that many children or more.
Mm-hmm. But now we have monogamy.
Yes.
And who invented that? It must have been the men on the lower rungs.
I think
they
so.
must have
It's always described
system.
that this is a gift for women to have monogamy, but I can't see how women are better off under monogamy. Some women might rather be the third wife of Bill Gates or a rich man or some other, rather than be the only wife of a poor clerk in a store or something. And even if you want to be the only wife, you have as a woman, your odds are better if there's polygamy, because it means most of the other women are taken, so there are many men left to choose from. So it's hard to see how women benefit really from monogamy per se, but men do. So if you look who benefits, monogamy is a way of making sure that every man, pretty much every man, can have a woman.
But even the guys on the top benefit, because it gets us, or gets the alpha male away from the stress of fighting these other guys off. So it gets the guys a nice life, or a calmer life.
Yes.
We might still attract, the best females, but they leave us alone, the other guys.
Yes, there's less competition under those circumstances, and there's some evidence that men who actually live with many wives, that it's stressful on the men. I've heard there's some studies that men who have many wives die younger than other men. I don't know if it's just the stress and challenge of caring for them and resolving the conflicts and so on. I'm not sure that's right, but
but anyway, it seems that men take more chances in life. They have riskier jobs. They risk their reputation.
Absolutely, yes.
And that is because they're in competition with the other guys, with the other males, for more reputation, more access to resources.
Yes. Again, look at evolution. Most of the women were going to reproduce, so it doesn't pay to take risks. You're going to have babies anyway. So we're descended from women who played it safe. We're probably descended from men who took chances, because if you play it safe and go along and act like everyone else, you'll be one of the 70 or 80% who did not reproduce, as opposed to fighting your way to the top. So we're descended from the men both who took the chances and were lucky. I think there's no gene for luck, but being willing to take chances is something much more in males, and that seems to be true still today. Everything from traffic, women can drive as well as men, but who drives the race cars to compete that way? It's mainly the men, and so forth.
How does this show up in culture in other areas, that men take more chances? Give us a couple of examples. We talked about jazz or music or creativity in arts, which is mostly driven by men.
Yes, that's very revealing. I'm an amateur musician myself, and I follow jazz, and we know women can play the musical instruments, just as well as the men, or almost. There might be a tiny difference if their hands are a little smaller or something on the piano, but women can play just as well, wonderfully, and they excel in classical music and all those things where you're given what to play and you play it. But all the creative aspects, where you have to take a chance on trying out something new, that's where men dominate. Most of the great composers, and in jazz, most of the improvising, the instrumental improvising, that's where men show up. In other respects in culture, going off to explore, to look at unknown lands, men have always done that much more than women. And again, why would it take a chance for a woman? What was she likely to gain by going off to explore unknown regions? She would risk getting killed or getting lost. And to what end? If she stays home, she'll still pass on her genes. This is looking at the way nature looks at it, where success is how many children you have.
Sure.
And that's what led to shape the personality of people today based on whatever genetic aspect of personality.
So what you're saying, it's not a conscious decision, but it's somewhere in our algorithm.
Predisposition. Should I go and try new things, take chances? But we're descended from the men who did, because if they stayed home and did the same thing everyone else, they might not have a chance. But if you go off and explore, yes, there are risks, but maybe you come home rich, and then you can have a fine wife, or maybe 3 or 4, depending on your culture, and profit from your success. So the payoff from the risk, the biological payoff for taking chances, was much bigger for men than for women.
And particularly, what type of research did you do in that question? Were there experiments, or what did you look at specifically when you researched that area?
Oh, I'm a laboratory person. Most of my laboratory research is on other issues, self-control and interpersonal rejection and belongingness, things like that. So my theories about gender were built on just reviewing the published studies and trying to put things together. I had a couple original papers. One was on the type of relationship. There's an argument that women are more social than men. They're easier to get along with. People like women more than men. They're friendly, cooperate more. Although actually there's a new study, women don't cooperate with other women very well. They cooperate in mixed groups with men and so on, but men will cooperate with strangers more. So there's this argument that women are more social than men, but I think that's only true if you define being social in terms of looking at one-to-one close relationships. So in understanding intimacy and communicating your feelings to another and understanding other people's feelings, yes, women are specialized in that. And again, they're bred to care for children and to have a good relationship with a man. If you look at being social in larger groups, there'll be shallower relationships because you can't be an intimate partner to 30 or 40 people, but a network of people where you just kind of know each other a bit and maybe you share information. Men do much more of that. If you think of any activity that depends on groups, you tend to find men will do that more than women, whether it's team sports or economic networks or building large networks of contacts. When I first published this, someone came to me and said they were studying consultants. And they have to build networks, and said even at the highest level, the men and women are both successful, but the men build larger networks. Is
there an evolutionary reason behind that? What's your hypothesis?
Again, I think there's a bit of a trade-off that maybe being good at one thing means you're not as good at the other. And if you look at the traits, so we talked about communicating your feelings. Well, everyone says women are better at sharing their feelings and so on. In an intimate relationship, sharing your feelings will help. But in a larger network, you may have rivals. You may, and if you're trying to use a car or a goat or whatever from someone to show your feelings, could be a disadvantage. You give away too much. So men hide their feelings more, which may make it harder for them to really have a totally satisfying, intimate bond with one person the way two women might. But it makes them better suited to the large network. And we as humans, our biological strategy was, how we solve the problems of survival and reproduction that every species has to solve. We have an unusual strategy, which is culture, which is building these large networks, sharing information, working together in large groups where we have different roles to play. Tomasello, one of the leading researchers on primates, he said, well, the chimps and the apes and so on, they will hunt in groups, but each one is still out for himself in the context of the group. He'll have some other opportunities in the context of a group, but he's not really cooperating with them. He won't do anything like if you and I are both chimpanzees in our hunt, we won't do something where I go and scare the prey off and you go and kill them and then we share them. Because if I scare them over to you and you kill them, well then you just eat them and I don't get anything. Mm-hmm. So, but humans do that sort of thing all the time. That kind of cooperation enables us to do much better. We're not as fierce, we're not fast, we don't have big teeth or anything to kill. Mm-hmm. But this kind of social life where we cooperate and work together has made us terrifically successful hunters. Mm-hmm. So this large group thing, this is much more of a male pattern. And I think males are psychologically designed more for these large group interactions, which is how our species has made progress, and why we have television and beautiful cities and buildings, with things that no other species has created anything like this.
So if we were made out of only females, we wouldn't have culture? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, probably, or not nearly as much. I mean, there's a big question. There are 200 countries in the world. I don't know the exact history of every one of them, but certainly not half of them were started by women, and I guess probably almost none of them were started by women. Today, women start small businesses, but big businesses are things that men build. And anthropologists, there's some view that maybe there were cultures that were ruled by women and so on, but why did they die out? Why couldn't they continue? Why couldn't they compete with others? It's probably because they don't make progress, that women relate to each other on this one-to-one intimate relationship, which is very satisfying and very important for children to grow up and for a satisfying life. But culture emerges from the larger networks where you have groups competing with each other and sharing information, and that's more what males do. And so if there were cultures that were started by women and ruled by women, they probably did not make progress, and probably the male-dominated ones passed them by coming up with innovations and creating progress, sharing new knowledge and new ideas that the more static female-run societies could not compete with.
Let's say you have a son and a daughter. In today's society, where we have monogamy, you don't have to fight off anymore and go crazy and discover new worlds. You survive, you find your mate, and you can reproduce. What would you, in today's environment, suggest, or what kind of hints would you give to your daughter and your son how to go through life? Is there any advice that you would give them, life advice?
Well, we live in a very unusual age. Usually culture builds on nature, so the men and women might be a little bit different, and then cultures tend to make them extremely different. If you look at many of the more traditional cultures, in the Middle East or parts of Asia and so on, men and women have quite different lives. Our cultures in the modern Western world have embarked on this experiment that we think culture should get rid of the differences, and so men and women should have equal opportunities. So it's a very nice time to be a young woman, because you have most of the options available to you. You can stay at home with a family, you can work hard on a job, you can have some mixture of the two. Also, we've sort of gotten this idea from the feminists that women don't produce as much as men because somehow they're oppressed. So there are many laws to make things better for women and many policies. It's a bit more unfortunate, I think, for the young men right now, and their culture is set up to make it harder for them to do things. I don't know quite what's happening in Europe, but in the United States, the schools decided we're going to treat boys and girls exactly the same, and then each time there's a question of which way should we do it, what's better for boys or what's better for girls. Even things like how much heat in the classroom. It's nicer for boys if it's a little colder, because boys have more energy. Girls tend to be colder, so even questions like that. Every time there's a decision, the decision makers are women, and they think, well, women are oppressed, and to do it the way that's best for boys would be sexist, so we should do what's better for girls. And over this happens, so that decision after decision is set up to be the way that is best for girls. So our schools increasingly, by many measures, are not doing as well with boys, they're not prospering in the school. They find school to be a more hostile environment, that it doesn't engage them and doesn't challenge them. Another important thing in the United States is this emphasis on self-esteem, and that you should go to the children and build up their confidence. Well, I'm not sure that's good for anybody, but if it is, it might be good for girls. Girls tend not to be as confident, and so a little more encouragement might get them to do it. Boys, probably for evolutionary reasons, boys have more confidence. They had to get ready, in evolution, to fight their way to the top, and so you needed to have the confidence to take the chance to try, at least, to fight the top man and see if you could take over that spot. So boys, especially as they move into the teen years, tend to have too much confidence, and so if you increase their self-esteem from that, you're just pushing them into this narcissistic sense that they feel entitled and they shouldn't have to work hard, and I think that's just a disaster for boys. Traditionally, organizations and cultures that got the most out of their males, they would train the young men to be humble, that respect has to be earned, you have to work hard to prove yourself. Indeed, when I was in graduate school, I had an advisor who only worked with males, and that's what he did. He was always criticizing, never praising. When more women came into the field, he started having women's students. That didn't work very well. And when I started to become a professor, I wanted to work with both males and females, and I kind of realized after trying a few things that, well, I need to encourage the women students a little more, and I need to keep pushing the men down and telling them you're not as good as you think you are. And that you know, it seems unfair to do it a different way. In fact, I told one of my graduate students this, and he said, well, that's just some kind of sexist prejudice. And I saw him, now that he's been a professor for 5 years, he came and told me, he said, you said this to me when I was in graduate school, and you're exactly right. I find the same thing. The men have too much confidence, and you need to be puncturing their bubble and pushing them down to earth, whereas the women, you know, need more encouragement. So again, we decided in schools we'll do the same for everybody. We're going to boost everybody's self-esteem. The boys like it. Remember, they want to think that they're great, and they want to be told they're great. And so being flattered and told, oh, you're wonderful, this feels very good, but it produces narcissism. I think it's not producing the best quality of men. One more thing, the very idea that you deserve respect, I think this is a new idea in many organizations, in corporations and universities and so on. And those of us old enough to remember when these were mostly male organizations, it was not like that. Respect had to be earned, and in fact you were always being put down and sarcastic remarks, and many in a joking way, but still they would make fun of you and put you in your place. This idea that you have to earn respect, this is very good for men, because you get the idea, well, I have to start at the bottom and work my way up, and men are confident, I can do it, I'm just going to start that way. When women went into the workforce, they were shocked by this, and because women had always been treated that they deserve respect, and so they insisted that the organizations change, and so now they say, well, everyone is entitled to respect. But this too, I think it's not the best for the organization, it's not the best for the men, although it is perhaps better for the women.
Last question, when you look back, one day you're going to retire, I guess, or you stop doing so much research, and you look back, what would you like to have achieved when you look back on your work? Do you have a big dream?
Yes. When I started out, even as a student, I was going to be in mathematics, and then that was kind of weird and not very satisfying. And then I wanted to do philosophy, and well, the opportunities for advancement are not, you know, the society doesn't need very many philosophers. But I wanted to understand the big picture of what human life is all about, and I wanted to understand the human condition. And so I became a psychologist, and I realized you can use social science data to tackle these. So I've written books on what is identity, meaning of life, why is there evil, human nature, and I want to just finish that project and have it all put together. I won't have time to do this all in my own laboratory, so in my laboratory I pay the rent, I do a couple of research programs that follow along step by step the way you do it, but I also want to think big and understand how all these things fit together. To me, the question of men and women and what are the differences, this is a step between my last book on human nature, that understand what's special about human beings is that we evolved to do culture, and that the traits that make us human, that separate us from other animals, are mostly things designed to enable us to create this new kind of social life. It's a transition between that and the next question, which is free will and control of action, because you know, to me a culture is not a physical thing, and yet it produces physical effects of how it moves behavior. So I wanted to understand, how does culture make people, how does it change the way people move their muscles and the way they act? So I could have used either men or women, but there are already 1,000 books on how culture takes advantage of women. So I said, well, nobody's written about how culture takes advantage of men, and I thought, well, let's look at that. And so for me, that's a step toward doing that. And I want to have it all figured out by the time I retire. I figure I have about 20 more years. I'm about on schedule. Maybe I'll make it.
Good luck to you. Thanks so much for coming in, Roy.
Thank you.